Hi, I'm Blake Rayhans.
And I'm Stacie Mallon.
And you are listening to the Optimized AF podcast.
We know life is hard. We're here to make it simple.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the Optimized AF podcast. This is Blake.
And this is Stacie.
We are so happy you guys are here listening with us today. We've got a great topic. We're going to keep going from the last episode on the topic of habits and routines. And we thought what we would do today in today's episode is we're going to share some stories. We talked about it a little bit. We mentioned that we're going to go a little deeper into letting you guys know a little more about us. And the best way to do that is to share. And we are excited to share some of those events from our past. And today we got one about habits and routines.
Yeah. So one thing that Blake and I talked about is the power of music. And so I'm going to lead off by starting at the end and then going to the beginning.
Tarantino.
One thing that's become a habit for me in the morning is we listen to the Calm app, and then every morning when the alarm goes off, I shut off the Calm app, and then I turn on one of our Spotify playlists and I pick a song, and it sort of has ended up being like, this is the song, the playlist for today. And I didn't even realize I was doing that and until actually James pointed it out to me and said, do you know that you like take 2 minutes to just choose kind of what our energy is going to be? I'm like, well, that feels like a really heavy responsibility now. I'm like, it went from being no big deal to now I'm like, this.
You are responsible for the how the day is going to unfold. Great. From the 2 minutes after you wake up. Yeah, James is putting a lot of pressure on you.
He was, so started stressing me out. But so now sometimes he chooses, but I think this comes from my past and something that was very powerful for me as a child. And I was sharing this with Blake. We thought it would be a good way to talk about the foundation, how to build a foundation. In the last episode, we talked a lot about how to start building a foundation and stacking habits and what can be powerful way for you to develop your own set of habits. And it takes time. It takes energy and time to do this and really intention. You can't just, you can say, hey, I'm going to start this habit, but we're going to talk about, I think in the next 3 episodes, how do you actually get a habit to stick? And that's the part that I think is hard for people. Again, everybody would be in optimal physical condition if everybody's stuck to their New Year's resolution. Why do people stick to those things and why don't they?
Yeah. I think, you said it perfectly. It is about the intention. When people think about why do we fail at certain things, and there's so many reasons that go into it, of course, and the theme of this podcast is we take this complex idea that there has to be 50 moving parts. It just has to, because it's so hard. Well, then it's got to be complex. That's why it's so hard for me. But people don't realize actually some of the most simple things to put into your life can still be difficult to do. But how you execute on it, how you implement it is really where it comes in. But I think it starts with the intention. Because if I say, hey, I want to have a habit, use your fitness example, right, Stacie? If I want to be fit, I want to be in the optimal physical condition, it's really easy for me to say that. There's a lot of science out there. I can go and get all the equipment. I can stock my fridge with all the right food. I can go and spend a few $100s and get sitting there in my kitchen, and I can say, all right, I'm going to do this. And then I fail. Well, I got to go back to where was my intention? Because if my intention was really in line, then my actions would follow. There's a gap there. It's kind of, there's some science behind it called the knowing doing gap. And we're not going to go too deep on that, but it's the difference between I know what I should do and I'm doing what I should do. And there's a gap in the middle. And that's where a lot of people get lost.
Yeah. And I think this is what we want to cover in the next couple of episodes on our own personal experience. So when I was 8 years old, I was here in Arizona, and some pretty dramatic events happened in my life. And I was put on a plane, and it was the middle of the school year. not a whole lot of explanation or detail for me on what was really happening. And I was put on a plane and I landed in the middle of Indianapolis, Indiana, and my paternal grandparents picked me up from the airport. And I actually have a picture of me getting off the plane. And I recently reflected back. I was looking at this photo and I just looked like, what is happening? My face was like, what? Should I be happy? I don't know what's going on. So I got off the plane and essentially I was moving back to Indiana to live with them. And as you can imagine, you're walking off a plane, and this is back before TSA kept you from behind the gates. So luckily my people were there to meet me, but I had only really met my grandparents a couple of times, and they picked me up and put me in the car, grabbed my suitcase, and we went to the house. And I just remember thinking like, what? Okay, well, I have no idea what's going to happen, right? And I started thinking about the story because it's not that dissimilar to what's happened in our lives in the last 6 months. Everybody's life kind of got thrown up in the air, and there are a lot of us that have still no idea what the outcome of all of this is going to be. And especially for our kids, as parents, I think this is something that I started to remember as well, thinking about what can I do for my own children. So the day after, the next morning, I remember my grandfather, who you'll hear me probably talk about a lot. He was just my person. He came in to the room and he just said, hey, he's like, good morning, sunshine. He's like, I made breakfast. And I was thinking like, quite frankly, like, I don't remember anybody ever making me breakfast in my life. I know Blake and I grew up kind of the same self-sufficient people. I think I poured my own cereal starting when I was 3. So I got up and he had made blueberry pancakes, and that we ate pancakes together on the porch, and then we went over to the garden. And I'll spare you the detail of the whole morning routine, but the fact is we created a routine. From the very first day, he created a routine, and we really did that same thing every day for as long as I can remember. Even when things changed and we didn't have a garden outside because it's Indiana, it got cold and there was snow on the ground, we did something similar, right? And my grandfather was one of those people that was very ritual based, and so he took a walk every day at 4:00. We ate at 4:30 every day. I was raised by my grandparents, so no wonder I like my snacks, right? So and then we had a second dinner at 8:00 because we were hungry again, and then had ice cream. So I think that I always go back to that place of thinking about what created safety for me in that space. And that was a big part of it. How he showed up for me, of course, but he created this ritual. And I think for our children and for ourselves right now, that ritual is very important. So going back to what I was talking about music, what I've now figured out for myself is, when you it's a habit when you don't do it and you feel like a piece is missing. And so sometimes we'll have a day, we've talked about chaos in our lives. So wake up, maybe, I don't know, the dog is barking downstairs and I don't wake up immediately, turn off the Calm app and pick a song. Something goes left in that situation. Yeah. I feel like weird, misaligned.
Yeah. Well, I think for our listeners, let's touch on that for a second, because we're talking about creating new habits a lot of times, but let's stop and acknowledge what are the habits that we already have and how do they impact us? Because I think the connection is very powerful, right? Because let's take, for example, just what you said, throws off your routine. You didn't listen to the music. Okay. I think everybody can relate to this. Have you ever had an instance where you're out and either one of two things happens? You realize I left my cell phone at the house, or you look at your cell phone and the battery's dead. Okay. Who listening, I wonder, and even maybe you can relate, has this feeling of gap and anxiety and something is thrown off. Mm-hmm. Well, let's really break down the basics of what's happening. Is there's something so ingrained in you, so ingrained in how you operate, AKA, let's talk habits, routines, right? We're talking about a physical thing, a phone, but they tie together. And that thing's now missing. So I think you're absolutely right. When you create these routines and you figure out the value that it's serving you, right? Because you've understood, I'll take it back to your story with your grandfather. That routine in that moment with the environment and the change and the uncertainty that was going on in your life. And at 8 years old, you shared with me on the way over here today to the studio, so much of it was just, I have no idea what this is. Nobody's talking to me. I'm not getting the information. And it wasn't even until years later that those questions came sort of pouring in. But in that routine, in the simple act of every morning, I know Grandpa's going to wake me up. We're going to have breakfast together. We're going to go tend to the garden. It gave you and provided and served you in a positive way with a resemblance of safety and security, a certain level of knowing, right? And that's obviously, here we are years later, not going to share how many years, but we're here years later. We're still talking about it, right? Yeah. And that served you well, even far after living in Indianapolis, Indiana.
Yeah. And, there are things like blueberry pancakes for me that are just like, if blueberry pancakes are on the menu, I'm probably getting blueberry pancakes. Like, it's just such a happy thing. And so I mention that because I think there are anchors related to habits. So to break this down a little bit for people thinking about, okay, how does this translate to my life? I think and again, we talk about Atomic Habits and some of the powerful things that we absorbed from that particular book. And there's also a book, The Power of Habit, which is also a great book about habits, and how you apply them in your daily life. But one thing that, when I read that book, I thought about this situation is that there are anchors that come back to you in your life. So when life gets up, there's upheaval. So sometimes you don't feel like that piece is missing because life is kind of going along in a really fluid way. And then shit will hit the fan. And then I feel like it's the anchors of those habits that you should probably go back to. So as an example, our children are going back to school. My kids start, on Wednesday, upcoming. And by the time this podcast airs, it's going to have been in the past. But ultimately, they've been out of sync, right? And so I'm really grateful that they're going to go back to this rhythm because I think that their mental health, their physical health, and so both of my kids are athletes. This week, they both were like, oh shit, we're going to start our sports for school. And so everybody started eating healthy this week.
I was going to say, you mean in that moment they realized that the last 2 months of staying up till 3 a.m. and eating snack food all night long and not exercising wasn't doing the best thing for them?
Yeah. And I'll share a proud mom moment last night. My daughter, I came home, it was like 8:00 at night, and she was coming out of our home gym, out of the sweaty garage where we have our home gym right now, 125 degrees. It's like Bikram workout. She was coming out of the garage and she's like, hey, Mom, when you go to the store, can you get more cauliflower rice? I ate all the cauliflower rice. And I was just like, I'm the best mom ever. Like, my 14-year-old has been conditioned to eat cauliflower rice, and I feel like that was a huge one. She's like, I'm gonna make a protein shake too, so we also need almond milk. I was like, I am doing something right in my life.
Hey, let's give that
I know,
give that
right?
up. But I do, for our listeners, that, like, if you're listening to this and you do have kids, let's stop there for a moment. I think we lose sight of it, right? That they are sponges, not just as toddlers. Your children are sponges through their adolescence and even adulthood, and they are consistently watching. And I know, I'm going to get a little deep here, but the role of parent never stops. I had gone through this with my dad. My dad got to a point in his life where he felt like there was a finish line, right? And he even told us, he said, I'm no longer dad, I'm Steve. Like, there was almost this shift where he said, I've gotten you guys to a point, my brothers and I, you're all men, you're adults. I know that I've raised you well. And it got to this point in his life where he sort of wanted to switch the hat around. Like, have you ever seen the movie Over the Top with Stallone? He wanted to turn the hat to
I
the
do
back.
that on the treadmill when I'm going to sprint. I'm like turning my hat around.
It was him symbolizing to us that I'm sort of done now. Now that he's gone, and that's a story for another podcast, I still find myself many times where I wish I had that example to still look at. I wish I still had that faucet of knowledge to absorb from. And I think when we take it back to your example with the nutrition, there's probably not likely many 14-year-olds out there that are coming up with, I have a palate for, and I'm looking for the habit of eating healthy and reaching for cauliflower rice instead of a bag of Doritos. That comes from what we are doing as parents and adults with the habits that we instill. And we do that in our household. I have 2 under the age of 6. And, again, proud papa moment here, but I have what I would say are probably 2 of the best culturally diverse eaters in terms of the different cuisine that they'll eat. I don't know many 6-year-olds that'll sit down at a plate of last night. We were having balsamic glazed pork chops over a bed of arugula with,
I'm coming to your
grapes
house
and gorgonzola. And here I've got a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old that are devouring this off their plates, and they love that meal. I can't tell you how many times it's, Dad, can you please make the pork and arugula? And anyway, before we go too far on the food thing, because I think Stacie and I are probably both getting hungry now.
Where's my pork?
It just, the point is that if you're listening out there, there's more to this thing about habits and routines than just yourself. Yeah. And I want you to really internalize that, because we're going to talk in another episode here, and maybe even a touch on it in this one, about the accountability factor that is involved in all this. And we'll touch on, who do you hold yourself accountable to? And that, I think there's probably no way that we can talk about that to a parent listener without acknowledging that you have a certain level of accountability to the people who are just silently watching all the time, absorbing and looking for you as the example of how they're going to live their life.
Right. And so as you set an intention, as we said from the very beginning about, hey, I'm going to form a new habit. So, we always want to challenge you at the end of every podcast to think about something differently, to try something new, to keep it simple and try something simple. So I would challenge you, like when you first wake up in the morning, what's the very first best thing for you to do as a habit? There's a lot of information and data out there that some people jump right on their phone, which is probably not the best thing to do. No judgment if that's your go-to, okay. But I think there's a kind of a FOMO neurological piece of let me grab my phone, right? So, and now we're using our phones as alarm clocks. Let's be realistic. I don't know anybody who doesn't. So how do you escape the compulsion to the very first habit you have is to check your email? And I think for me, one thing I had to do is set my alarm and then literally stop my alarm and put it back down. I did this habit for a while where I realized when I got on my email first thing before my workout, man, it just wasn't the same. Like my brain shifted to that place versus shifting into a place of self-care as a primary. And there's lots of reasons. So think about the following things, right? If think about a world where the first thing you think of when you wake up is taking care of yourself. The first thing you think of when you wake up in the morning is setting an intention for the day by choosing a song to get out of bed to. You could use Mel Robbins, the 5-second rule, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, get up. Whatever habit you want to start instilling, I think a first thing in the morning habit is a good place to start. It's a common denominator. You got to get out of bed at some point.
It absolutely is. And you couldn't say it probably more simply than this, that you're only as good to other people throughout the day if you've been good to yourself first, right? If you go and you start your day in such a bad place that you don't feel productive, you don't feel motivated, you don't feel inspired, you're not ready to take on what we all know the day is going to throw at you. I mean, it's a rarity that you have these blissful days where everything falls in line and the birds are chirping and somebody just walks up and hands you your coffee and just everything's blissfully ignorant to the worries of the world. That doesn't happen. So you have to be intentional about serving yourself first. Now, I know, and I'm going to share a story. I know some people might be listening to this and saying, that's not my world. You guys don't understand. I have to do. Okay, so in my background, I spent lots of years in the hospitality industry, managing and running operations of these hotels that were operating 24/7. And so legitimately, I woke up in the morning, the first thing I wanted to know was what happened at my property while I was asleep. And it was an obligation for me to immediately jump into, is there a fire that I have to put out? Metaphorical fire, of course, hopefully.
Hopefully, yeah.
And so I had gotten into that habit. Now, I will tell you, though, my experience is when I left the hospitality industry, it took me years to break that. It took me years to acknowledge that I was still doing it and that it wasn't serving me well. And it was such a great epiphany moment when I finally realized it and said, I no longer need to do this. It's no longer a must. So why am I still doing it?
And
I stopped.
Let me ask you a question too. And I said this to you in the car, and it's a coaching tool that I use all the time. Is that a story or is that the truth? So even in the hospitality world, when you first woke up in the morning, is it a story or is it a truth that you couldn't have taken 5 minutes to set an intention for the day and do something different? That's probably a story,
right?
It
absolutely was.
Because had you slept 5 more minutes, it would have made no difference to the world. So I think that's something to challenge yourself when you think about habits, as you think about instilling a habit at the first part of your morning. You can tell yourself a story. I can't because of fill in the blank. I struggle to do that because, I have to do X, Y, and Z. And there are 100 first things you can do. You could get out of bed every morning and go give your kids a kiss and a hug in their beds. That makes a huge difference in their day. There are things you can do for yourself. You can, roll over and maybe give your, if you have a partner, maybe give your partner some love first thing in the morning. I'm just saying, it might be pretty good for your marriage and your partnership. What's the very first thing you do every day? I think is what we're saying is that's a really critical part of your life. And if you're choosing to pick up the phone as the first part of your day, what is that saying about your life? And to say that that's what you have to do, I will just honestly challenge everybody that's listening that that's a story that you're telling yourself.
And you have to sort of stop and step outside yourself, which is good. We all should be able to do that. That self-reflection is very powerful because, and you're absolutely right, it was a story because in every case, no matter what information I was getting, saw the emails from my night auditor, which is the position that, kind of stood at the front desk all night long, and saw what basically the download of information that happened from the night before. The reality is if there was truly a metaphorical fire for me to put out, they would have been blowing my phone up at 2:00 in the morning, and I would have woke up and I would have went down there and taken care of it. That rarely happened, thankfully. And nothing that I downloaded, I'll use from those emails was really of importance that it couldn't have waited 5, 10, 30 minutes. It really wasn't. And so I absolutely made up a story in my mind that made sense to me based on information that I was, maybe given or gathered in whatever form. And it didn't serve me well at all.
Yeah.
But you have to figure out what that is. And on the conversation we were talking about, we're going to bring this back to music, is we felt, Stacie and I, that music is one of those things that it's very universal in terms of how it impacts people, and you all have a very individualized sense of what music really moves you and motivates you, and that's why we decided to kind of take it to that. So there's probably a Spotify playlist or some particular song that transports you, puts you in a mood, sets the path forward, and I think that's important to understand about yourself, and then maybe incorporate that into your morning. So
what we're going to do, I just had a thought, is create a Spotify playlist for this podcast, and we'll add the songs that we're talking about every day. So my song this morning was Raise Your Glass by Pink, because I just wanted to kick ass and take names today, and that's the song for me that's like, let's get this shit done. We're doing podcast today. I have some stuff going on this afternoon that's really important. So I just wanted to really get motivated today. So we'll put together a playlist and we'll put that out there. So your challenge before our next podcast, because we're going to be moving on to accountability in the next podcast, the next step in creating habits is to choose a habit. Choose how to wake up every morning. Challenge yourself if that's the story or that's the truth. Set an intention and do it. And with that, we will talk to you guys next time.
But I'm going to actually add to that, because I think just on the other side of that coin, it's find that habit that's not serving you.
Yes.
Be intentional about recognizing something you're doing right now that is not setting you up for success. So as Stacie said, as you're pointing out and uncovering this new thing that you want to do, the thing that you can do to best start your day, also take some inventory of what you're already doing. And I think that's a very powerful thing to do. Write it down, share it with your spouse, share it with your partner, share it with somebody that you care about and say, look, I've been doing this and I need to stop doing it. And I'm going to share it with you because I want you to know that I'm intentionally trying to stop doing this.
Well, and think about this. Blake's using the term which we use all the time in coaching is it serving you? The answer is whatever you're doing is serving you somehow. So also get to the bottom of how the negative habit is serving you. Is it making you, if you're checking your emails first thing in the morning, it's probably helping you feel like you're in control of your life, or that you're in the know, or that you're insecure. So also get to the bottom of how it is serving you, and then decide that it's not serving you in the way you want to move forward. And that's how you start to shift. And to Blake's point, absolutely, as we talk about accountability next, state it, share it, commit to it. And that's where we're going to start next time, is on accountability.
Well, we're so happy that you all were with us today. We hope you enjoyed this information. We know that it's an evolution. Habits and routines are something we build upon. So we're looking forward to having you back for the next episode. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks. Talk to you guys soon. Hey guys, thanks for listening to our show. You can find Blake and I on social media channels at Blake Greyhans and at Stacie Mallon.
Be sure to follow Optimized AF on Instagram and rate and subscribe to this podcast on iTunes. See you next time.